Hello and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. Hope you'll enjoy listening to this one. It's a little bit of an anarchy parlay for you today about aging, audits, and productivity quotas, beginning with an abstract from PistilWhip. Imagine a world where, after a certain age, individuals are audited each year to ensure they are contributing members of society. Put a pin in it. Those who fail to meet the productivity quota are relegated to permanent retirement. Disclaimer: the concepts presented in this parlay are not indicative of the writer's views or goals. They are simply outlined for the purpose of discussion. I'll jump on the bandwagon of that disclaimer. I reserve the right to discuss this without stapling this opinion to my forehead. Good talk. All right, moving on. There is a strong historical correlation between a country's continued socioeconomic development and a reduction of its citizens' fertility rates. The direction of causation is a subject of debate. This in turn leads to an increase in the median age of a country's population. Fewer births means fewer young people. PistilWhip continues, countries with social welfare programs essentially ask young workers to pay for the support of their elders, if, for example, retirees. As old age is correlated with higher healthcare costs, the demographic shift toward higher median age thus places a greater burden on a smaller number of young workers. And this is currently a problem in a significant number of countries. You might already be aware. The .gif presented here illustrates Japan's demographic transition from 1888 to 2019. There's a distinct inversion in the population pyramid toward the end of that period, where the top of the graph, representing older people, is much wider than the bottom, representing younger people. You'll see right now that the top is narrower, and essentially at the bottom, that's like people being born, so lots right now, right? And then as we get nearer to, so you see the top is smaller for most of history, but it's starting to get more narrow and more and more and more narrow as we reach 2019. You see the trend is very clear. Suddenly it's basically the reverse of what we started. I'll let it roll over. Yeah, there you go. You can see that it's basically the opposite of what it was historically. And note that the number of people is also just larger. And so while the trend is reversed, it's worse than that sounds because the number of people in the reversed version at the top is way higher than the number of people that were at the bottom when it was the other way around. So that's, yeah. Anyway, this parlay presents one solution to this perceived problem: a productivity audit. Setting aside the practical matters of what such an audit would entail, put a pin in it, the goal is to reduce unproductive members of society in an effort to reduce its welfare costs. In effect, the top of the population pyramid would be artificially cut down as non-productive adults are removed from the population, which in turn reduces the burdens on working adults with dependents as well as on the healthcare system broadly. Another pin, so what would the productivity audit look like? Reasonably, it would need to be separated by category or department. Physical labor, academic study, and creative pursuits would follow different criteria. The specific criteria, PistilWhip says, are outside the scope of this parlay. I don't think they can be. I don't think they are. I think I'm going to try to talk about them a little bit. But your question basically is like, let's see the productivity quota, productivity audit. Cool. Okay. There are no guided questions at the time of this writing. Oh, yes, there are. I got some guided questions for you. For further reading, population pyramid, demographic transition, and dependency ratio are the terms to search for. I decided not to search for dependency ratio. I can infer what that would be like, but I felt like I was familiar enough with the subject that it would be more fun to see me try to resolve it without further aid, since I understand it well enough that I know what you mean. I hope I will still have some reasonable things. But yes, I do think that's a good suggestion. This is a relevant issue in the real world. I won't go on about this for too long, but we are going to do some more disclaimers for a sec. Like, obviously, we're not going to go too much more on the one I did before. This is a real serious problem in the real world. As with a recent Mr. Food parlay, we're going to talk about this cosmically. It's cosmically an interesting idea. Locally, or like in the world around us, this is terrifying, and I'm not sure what we're going to do about it. But it's also okay to think about it in theory and say, like, this is sort of like fun or even funny as a thought experiment, despite it being like a real serious bad thing I have a lot of sympathy for people towards in the real world. I just wanted to say that's really hard, and I'm sorry for anyone that's affecting. We're talking about it here for the purpose of ideological exploration and whimsy, which maybe for some people isn't fun. So I'll apologize here for that, but we are going to do that. But I wanted to acknowledge, like, it's a negative thing in the real world. A little bit more to the point, you know, so like, there's like two parts of this that I want to discuss. Basically, this is, I guess, not really a disclaimer. We're sort of getting our bearings. What are we doing here exactly? An extreme version of the thing that PistilWhip is suggesting here is basically to make it illegal to be old, right? At a certain point, people will not be able to do productive work in their life, though we will get back to that point. And so realistically, if you're not going to just make it illegal to be old, what you're doing here is asking what jobs allow you to make money for longer, or what jobs make so much money now that making money later, But there's another problem, which is that this system auditing you every year would, on its surface, seem to benefit people who invest their time in jobs that make more money later. So let's look at a few examples. We're getting down to the nuts and bolts already, but we will do a whole section on like being a bit more practical. I just need to show you this example for a sec. Let's imagine 3 people with 3 different types of life plans. You might even be able to think of such people in your own life. I wonder who that could be. We have 3 examples. Strategy A is to just do work probably the way most people in our current world do. They're not particularly min-maxing for making money now or later. They make money pretty steadily, and for many people make a similar-ish amount of money as they go through life. People's, retirement plan or whatever, or savings if they have them, investments, accrue as they get older, yes, but their costs also tend to increase as they get older, either health or like if people start a family or buy a house or paying the mortgage on a house, or buying a slightly more expensive thing or using gas for a car more or whatever it is, And so I think it's fair to say strategy A, at least relative to the other 2 we're going to talk about, is like the median or the middle strategy. You don't particularly try to invest time now to make more money later, or particularly sacrifice benefits later to make more money now, which is what strategies B and C will be. Strategy B is basically sow seeds. So you try to make more money later by investing time and often money and effort now. This is something like getting additional education or starting a business. This is probably the category I would be in. So strategy B. And then strategy C, a lot less common, but it does exist, is making more money now in exchange for being better off later. This does matter, though. A lot of people who have a lot of money use this strategy, doing things that aren't good for the world, their social life, their optics, like their reputation, and arguably also not good for themselves now, because it makes money now, and then later they'll have a lot of money and they think they don't care about those consequences. They might change their mind when they get to later, but a lot of current rich people in our existing world are like this. They have sort of taken a strategy where they mortgaged future benefits in exchange for some benefits now. They make more money, but they're bad people. And so the interesting thing about this thought experiment is that those people are essentially just deleted from existence. If you don't have a plan to make money forever, then you get kicked out of this society, unless you were to make a rule that means that if you make a lot of money now, then it's okay to be a burden on society later. But the way you've described the parlay, there isn't a measure for this. Now, PistilWhip, this parlay is very open to interpretation, and I don't really feel like that's your fault. What I'm going to try to do is answer what I think is an interesting interpretation of the parlay. And I think that in this case, strategy C should be left as something that this policy disadvantages. In other words, people that sacrifice benefits in the future to make more money now. If you read this parlay very literally, it sounds like we're criticizing those people, and I think I'm going to leave that alone. The question, though, is what we do with strategy B. Hi. Whoops, is that me? Hi. Strategy B, right? You are investing time now to make more money later, which sounds like what this society wants. But does it want that, though? I mean, you do then spend more time in your life to execute your plan for making money. Unless you make more money, like forever, it kind of seems like if you invest time now to make money later, you're putting society in a position where they have to pay for you to have taken a strategy where you essentially take your time. And then later, if you don't make like more money or more money, you are making your money at a time when you cost more healthcare to the society. So if this feels impractical, let me spell it out differently. Strategy A makes a little bit more money over time in our current society, while not particularly investing now or later, right? They make some money kind of evenly throughout time. We're going to get into the details of the productivity audit in a minute, but what you're going to imagine, right, is like for most people's job situation, they seem vaguely as productive year after year, any given year. Do you think for most people, the average person, there aren't significant spikes or dips in how productive they are to society, for the most part? You can think of other people in the world where there absolutely are huge dips or, peaks in how productive they are to society. Even someone who like makes movies, for example, might make you a lot of money in a year where one of their movies comes out, but then like what happens the year where they're working on a movie and it doesn't come out, We will get into that in the productivity audit. I'm not going to take an oversimplified view of this idea where we don't count stuff like that. PistilWhip specifically put in a little measure for like academic study and creative pursuits. I feel there that you were acknowledging, or at least inviting me to acknowledge, PistilWhip, that it could be absolutely reasonable and a society wouldn't easily work without some kind of measure where if you're investing time now to make money like immediately later, like literally next year, not in like 2 decades, most jobs are not actually viable unless you allow that. So we're not going to do like a stupid version of it, because that would obviously just not work. Again, you could do a version of this where you say it's basically just illegal to be above a certain age and you get kicked out or killed or something. What happens when you get permanently retired? But it doesn't seem like that's what you're interested in this topic, and I don't think that's the interesting thing either. I think that the interesting question is, what is the benefit of these people investing time? So let me demonstrate that. Year in year, you imagine strategy A evaluates as being similarly productive. But if strategy B makes 50% more money than strategy A, but makes 50% less money for half of their life, that is, they make 50% less money for, until they're 35 and then they die at 70. Whoops. But the average age that men live is anyway, but hopefully it'll be longer than that. Who knows? Maybe I'll die very early, relatively early. And for the second half of their life, they make more. Well, the thing is that for the most part, if you have money squirreled away, you kind of make more money that way as well. And a lot of the time, actually, the jobs where you invest time now to make more money later don't especially make you like more money later. The job just in doing the thing inherently requires more time, but simply doesn't generate more direct profit, if that makes sense. A lot of art, for example, we might agree is a societal good, but just straight up is less efficient to produce as far as like making money, if you want to think of it that way. So that's why I'm saying I think there's a question where if you look at a society where we're eliminating costs and then you invest time now to make more money later, it's like in a way you are kind of going to be older, costing the society more, which this society is fixated on in this example, which means maybe that doesn't reflect as well, basically. It seems like the system that this optimizes for is medium-term investments. So you invest some time to do better later in life, but not much later, not by too much, basically. If you have like a 20-year plan, no, that's not that rewarded by this system, I don't think. But spending like 4 years in education, it probably still fine, if that makes sense. Okay, so again, like I feel like this is a problem in the real world. If people invest time to make more money, but then it takes them longer and they live longer making more money, it's like you're trying to make the problem better by making the problem worse, sort of. You see what I mean? And in the real world, I don't think it's probable that that will work. Like a lot of existing countries that have this actual problem in the actual real world are currently trying to get people to immigrate or have more kids or start a family to resolve this problem. But I think that that's very unlikely to work because it seems to me that the kids would have to make more money. And every generation would always have to make more money. Not just more money, but more money than the more money than their parents made. And then their kids would have to make more money than that more amount of money. And at the same time, we're also not decreasing the population. Like no society in real life is going to agree to do this in PistilWhip's example. At least I don't think they will. And so I don't think that will work. Like I think in current humanity, countries attempting to resolve this problem with like normal population incentives, but that do not do the thing in PistilWhip's thought experiment will fail, I think. I'm just a layperson. I don't know. I haven't done the math. I don't know a ton about this subject, but my current opinion is that that definitely won't work. It seems much more valid or likely that tackling the idea of economy itself and trying to transition to a different type of economy or a post-scarcity society is much more likely. It would be very difficult, almost impossible, but this situation is literally impossible with the current methods. Like it will not be resolved that way. And so it seems to me like that would be a more tenable, like this is the time to do something extreme and different. The world is just different. It doesn't work the same way. The old systems need to be discarded, but they're not doing that. And PistilWhip is. How delightful. So let's get to that productivity audit, shall we? Yeah. So as you said, reasonably, it's going to be separated by like category or department or something. Things like physical labor, academic study, creative pursuits. And here's where we can get into some details. First of all, I think I have three basic steps. The first one is what makes work productive? Like what is productive work in a society? Second thing is categories, basically. Yeah, there's definitely one that's going to be like education. But we have to think about the others a lot, in my opinion, anyway. I mean, I guess we'll see. And then the third one is basically like the consequences. I just think it's really interesting about this subject. What would happen? What is like the meta in a society like this? I mean, if you assume that you get relegated to permanent retirement, that means you die. You're like executed from orbit by a Skynet satellite laser. Like if you don't make enough money, people would definitely game making enough money. And again, without fixing on that, it would be really easy to make a simple version of this parlay where you just say that will make the world a dystopia in this way and like done with that topic. You know what I mean? But I just don't think that's as interesting. It probably would make the world into a dystopia, but we have to assume we're going to try to create some criteria where you could maybe make a functional society like this, though I still have no idea how you would get from where we are currently to a society like this, nor do I agree that would be actually good to do, but we will attempt to make it like a real version of this thing, which will be hard. Again, in many cases, when you give specific criteria for productivity, it usually results in employees in existing companies in our world being less productive, gaming the system. And so we would need to find a way where it, as best we can, rewards you being like actually productive, basically. I think there are some ways to do that. Let's start by doing that by talking about what productivity is. So, for example, I was saying earlier that rewarding work that doesn't require retirement as early seems kind of logical at first, but then the problem is that those people are also older and thus probably cost more welfare. If you look at it, I think it's useful to start from the ideal societal member in this society. That was horrifically badly worded. The ideal person in this society. It's basically somebody young and healthy that makes a lot of money, right? And so if you get older and you make more money, it sounds like you need to make more money than your now existing healthcare costs or like societal costs, you know? Yes, people that are younger have some often minuscule, like practically none, but okay, technically some societal cost, right? Like that person using the roads or public transit of some kind is, I guess, wearing it down by some amount, but very, very little. And a lot of the time, at least in our society, you pay for most of the other stuff, or you really pay for that too. It's just very indirect feeling anyway. So we're going to say that that's negligible. You can have no societal costs, but for this society, it doesn't really matter. It only matters that your societal cost, or load, if you like, equals the amount of output you put out. So if you make $2,000 and you cost society $0, that's more or less the same in this system as if you make $3,000 but cost the society $1,000 a month. Basically the same. You can therefore see that it is possible, depending on what like a common wage is in this society, it is possible to be fairly old and still be a contributing member of society. Again, I don't think that matters or is a thing that people should be judged on in the real world, but that's what we're talking about in this parlay. You are going to be put in a position where you need to make more money to be older, but not necessarily a ridiculous amount more money. I don't want to act about it like that. We might also consider, you didn't really include anything about this, but something I would consider putting in as a provision is that you don't increase the averages, which is something you would have probably, I would imagine, about how much do people make at this given age or for this cost or whatever. You could do it a few different ways. I think it's reasonable to omit some people. Like if somebody wins the lottery, if there's the lottery in this society, maybe don't include them in that average. Maybe that one's obvious. But also, you know, if someone goes viral on social media, maybe evaluating what they did to get viral on social media, you should look at it as like winning the lottery, even though there is a potentially legitimate business strategies that involve like flirting with that approach. But I'm not like, my business strategy isn't to go viral. It's just a thing that does sometimes happen with videos that affects my income. You know, the drift frame, warframe video for me, this video, randomly going viral does have an outsized effect on the trajectory of my career. And that is part of the career. But my like business strategy is not to make viral videos. Like there are some people for whom that is their business strategy. But we're going to assume in this society that at baseline, we, you know, don't treat that as being like, oh, now the median goes way up, you know. Looking at it another way, we can also look at the resources that productive work demands. So for a simple example, I do not currently make very much money, and you could argue don't add a lot of value to society. YouTubers are often criticized for like not adding a lot of value to society. But my operation cost is also extremely low. And there are some other benefits to me not doing some other job. For example, I don't commute. So that's one less car on the road for that. It's also less gas that I have to expend. This is an important concept. Using myself as an example, like currently, there's a limit on how much supply of gasoline we can get in my part of the world. So it is good if people make a lot of money and then can buy the more expensive gasoline, but it's kind of better if they just don't use the gasoline. And looking at it another way, so at the moment, I have a pretty fuel efficient car, but it's got a small tank. So right now it costs me about $50 to fill up that tank. And that gets me not that far, but it is what it is. And I have a small gas tank. So even though gas is kind of expensive compared to what it was recently, that is not as bad as it would be for some people. They'd be filling up their tank and it's like $75 or $100, but they also get less miles to the gallon than I do. You know, I have a pretty fuel efficient car for a full gasoline vehicle. And so that reduces the cost. And so basically what I'm getting at is when you look at it, for a lot of people, them doing their work costs significant resources. It costs time, money, and limited supplies of things like gasoline in this example, that the society benefits from those things not being expended. So if you do some work that, yes, your operation cost, if you're employed at this company, is like so-and-so, you know, let's just say, again, this $2,000 standard for the sake of simplicity. Let's say I, in this example, would be thrilled to make $2,000. Thank you for your support, folks. I'm happy that I'm making the money I'm making, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll get there. And then the other person makes $2,000. But to make that $2,000, they do have to pay some societal expenses that most people don't, at this type of the conversation, usually think of as being societal expenses. But they are, basically, is the point I'm trying to make. And so things like you need to be in the world, clogging up the logistics of things like traffic or public transit. You need to expend, gasoline or electricity to get where you're going, things like that. You need to be healthy in a way that you would be more healthy if you didn't have to do this or that job. These things don't cost a fortune, but they do cost more money than I think people give them credit for. And in this system, that money should be deducted from the salary that the person earns, because that is value the society loses, pays basically, for that person to make that money. If you didn't make this money, or to put it another way, if you made little enough money that you only can pay for your gasoline and groceries, we would actually be better off if you stopped working and we just gave you the money for the groceries, and then the society can bank the gasoline. That there, on some level, that is a benefit. So without getting into advanced economics, where I'm sure there's an argument that that's not true, but that's how it seems to me, and that's what we've got. You asked me about this, so I think that matters. I think that's worth considering, and that our current society does bend over pretty backwards to allow everybody to do what is contrived to be useful work. But a lot of that work actually wouldn't be useful if we optimized. So in other words, a lot of factory or grocery store jobs, I don't belittle those jobs. I like it that there's I've needed people to help me when doing those things. I do not dislike people doing these jobs, but the fact of the matter is there isn't a clear benefit to, for example, in a lot of groceries, not just letting the customer check out their own stuff a lot of the time. There are benefits sometimes to that being the case, but not adopting that more than a lot of places currently are. I feel like it doesn't make sense in this system. In our existing world, remember, this is a hypothetical, in our existing world, there are many reasons to do that, like that it is virtually impossible to get out of the current system that we're in. And so if we have no plans to move toward a post-scarcity society, people do need to have a way to work. And so maybe the society should contrive people to be able to work and have what is contrived to be a useful job. But under a critical enough analysis where the society is willing to bend over backwards and excommunicate people from existence, or whatever we do to people that aren't productive enough in this thought experiment, you would probably consider most of those jobs deeply suboptimal. It would be better to just make it so they didn't need to be done, basically. Let's actually look at that. Let's say that a society with our tech level is willing to do basically anything to optimize this. And again, let's assume a not chaotic, stupid version of that philosophy. Chaotic evil, maybe. Okay, but we're not going to assume the government is evil, mustache-twirling cartoon villain evil and stupid. They're lawful evil, I guess. They would be chaotic evil if they did that. So they're not chaotic evil. They're not just going to do chaotic things for no reason. They're doing something very brutal and cold, but in a way where they are genuinely trying to, not stupidly, not for corruption's sake, achieve a better society in that way. Again, we might not think that it actually is better. Humans in real life wouldn't actually behave that way, but let's just assume for the sake of the idea. So let's get down to the business of what would the productivity audit be like. So as I've laid it out, there's basically some criteria. We're looking for people in the society to make a good amount of profit for the society, not necessarily for themselves. This opens up the possibility that we might consider giving people some universal basic income, for example. That might be efficient. It might be that having people buy their groceries or gas or whatever, or do jobs that involve more expense for those things, isn't efficient, it turns out. And it's actually better for those things to just be bought, and then people have the money for that, or they're given the money for that, and they focus on making the money. I think that's a more efficient way for people to make money. Don't you? I personally feel like if you could have it be that you just focused on doing the thing you were doing in your life, you would either do better, let's say, creative work, which would then, it's very likely make you more money, or you would have time to do the creative process right with a little time now left over to make it make money. That's a pretty big deal in the creative space. That's certainly one I can relate to. I have to make the thing make money, but I also have to make it good. Because I have to make it make money, this is the thing that needs to get cut when I have limited time. But if I didn't have limited time, I would have time to, to the extent that it's productive, execute all of the creative things, but still have enough time to do the requisite it makes money to like do this for a living. And so it would be significantly more efficient if I could just not worry about basic expenses and just focus on that. Or like, you know, you're in a space that has vaguely functional like air conditioning and is vaguely quiet and etc. Another way to look at this is the productivity audit ought to take those things into account. If you don't have a society that just welfares everybody these things and then says like how much money are you making relative to your well-being, then you should certainly go to people's space and say, okay, well, given your circumstances, are you doing a relatively good job? Again, I really don't like this from a broader societal perspective. A lot of the time, it's eminently unclear how productive people would be if they were given like better circumstances. The answer is some people would be hilariously more productive, but other people wouldn't be more productive at all. And it requires deeper psychological introspection to understand like which is which or what causes which one. There are people for whom I have a friend who is one of two siblings, and their parents have been very hands off with both siblings and they've said why. They've said they're worried that if they coddle the siblings, they will be spoiled and unproductive. It seems to me like that is true of my friend's sibling. Like they would be unproductive and have been a bit spoiled when they've gotten those resources before. They want to just live their life and like sit around playing, you know, Counter-Strike or whatever. I don't know this person that well, so sorry. And you know what, by the way, maybe that's fine. I'm not necessarily passing the judgment on what you do with that time. We could talk about that this parlay, but we don't have time. But I don't think that my friend is in that boat. He just wants to do the thing he wants to do, and it doesn't really matter what the people around him are doing or faffing about. He's the kind of person that if he was in this apartment and it was super hot, I would be going, it's not a very optimal time to do a bunch of work because it's super hot. And he would just take off his clothes and start recording and figure something out for the face cam. And I guess there's a part of me that feels like, I guess I should do that. I'm called to do that or something. But there's a cost to that as well, you know, needing to adapt that way. So that part is very tricky, like if you're in this situation. Therefore, I think there's a fork in this parlay where you could imagine a version of this thought experiment where you essentially give everybody some social welfare. You would figure out an amount that it turns out causes people to produce optimal working conditions. And at some level, some amount of money that you give everybody in this society will make people cost less money to maintain. Like, for a simple example, if every single person in the world was forced to get a checkup and the doctor did a good job with that checkup every year, I would imagine that that could reduce healthcare costs. You see what I mean? We'd find things sooner. At some, maybe not literally a checkup, but at some expenditure of resources to get everybody to like be healthier or do their due diligence or be a minimum level of well off. You give everybody $30 a month to buy fancy multivitamins. Probably doesn't add much of a health ad. Most people get enough of most of their micronutrients, like from the variety of food they eat. But if everybody is missing a random one here and there, it's possible that that rather minor expense would mean the society would actually net money. You see what I mean? And so there is a way to choose here where we say, does the society welfare you like to be in a good situation to work on stuff or no? And then if they do, you do then have to work that off, but it's going to be some amount easier to work that off. The society pays you $500 to exist, but you now need to pay, like earn $500 more of value in society. If that sounds bad, remember, it doesn't have to be right away, right? If you're a student, that department can say, we're going to be helping you now because you usually in that, you know, track of life, you're going to do something that could earn us significantly more money as a society. So we'll kind of take care of it while you do that. I would imagine the society would strongly consider making like a, you know, universal education a thing or like free college tuition. And would therefore tax people a lot. Like some current countries take a strategy like this. I would imagine this country with this policy probably is in that boat. Not so much United States, more so Norway is a country that does that. Anyway, there you can look it up. There are countries that take this approach. You get taxed a lot, but you get most of these services like pretty much no questions asked for free, and we just kind of balance it out. What I'm arguing is that the cost of not doing that in the United States right now is so large that it would be a savings to just not do it. It might not be a savings for the rich people in the United States, but for the well-being of the whole country, I would argue that it pretty clearly would be a good in some form. There's so many resources expended by not having that assurance, by like people having bad hospital care that then means they need more hospital care, or by people who very inefficiently financially resolve a medical need because that care isn't given. Like, I think it would probably be a societal financial benefit, societal, not to rich billionaires, I don't care about them, to the society, if you didn't have that problem. I don't know, but you asked me. That's what I think. So the strategy I would take as the campaign leader for this productivity audit thing, whether I'd want to be in that position or not, I don't know. I would say, like, it is reasonable to give people some basic services that's pretty likely to increase the amount of money people make. Also, I think there's a societal benefit to simply not encouraging people to bother doing jobs that don't make that much money for the country. The country could automate those things, so we'd rather you focused on that other stuff. Let's imagine, for the sake of discussion, that the country is small as well. I've been imagining South Korea for whatever reason, but it makes some sense. South Korea is a small landmass, and they have a lot of interest, their government has a lot of funding interest in making money through things that don't require like a ton of landmass, like K-pop and video games and Samsung are some things that are over 20 to 40% of the South Korean economy in real life. And South Korea also has a very severe population like spread problem, dependency ratio thing. This topic is very relevant in South Korea. So for whatever reason, I've been thinking of South Korea, Germany. But anyway, I've been thinking of South Korea. So one of the things about that is that they would kind of like to min-max a bit and have most people be making money in a way where they just like do a thing that is a global export, increases their optics. Basically, culture or entertainment jobs and technology jobs are something that the South Korean government seems to want a lot and funds decently aggressively in real life currently. And I think that's a reasonable strategy. That seems kind of smart. So if you do that, something we might call social maxing your society, you're going to be encouraging people to do a lot of, I guess, kind of my job is what we've ended up in. But not only this at all, other arts and things like video games, I feel like could be made to be a pretty efficient financial instrument without like being unartistic. Remember, here we're taking kind of the opposite approach of the AAA industry that is sort of afraid of taking risks. And instead, we want to be like actually culturally relevant, not a follower. We want people to have the time to be the trendsetter because that's in some ways where you make the money too. And so let's do that. Let's even also get the AAA money and follow our own trend. Have our indie studios be very focused on getting all the time and effort they need to make something new and innovative, and then plan to have AAA studios that also make a AAA version of that and get a bunch of money. But it's actually us following our own trend that we intentionally planned out. You have the option for the productivity auditors to like kind of plan society a little bit and metagame in ways that you can't without a government that is coordinating the action of the citizens. We're getting into a really weird, like Chinese communism thing where like the Chinese government, the modern Chinese government has a really interesting relationship to this, where some Chinese products and cultural mainstays are like would be impractical if it weren't for the Chinese government, like basically forcing people, but managing also. There's some work being done, you could argue, that production. I'll give you a simple example. So in China, there's a style of tea called liu bao, which is tea that is fermented and then aged in like a wood environment, a little bit like whiskey aging in casks in a warehouse. And the fermentation process deactivates some bitterness, and then that aging process really gets some woody, whiskey-like flavors. Not that smoky though, more like Yeah, like a not smoky scotch, or not really like bourbon or rye. It's not that punchy. It's a subtle tea. It's an interesting type of tea, Liu Bao. Liubao, if you're interested. Anyway, recently in history, there has been a rise of a new type of tea called shopuer, or ripened or cooked tea. And this was a tea that is inspired by Liu Bao's process, but basically the Chinese government like wanted a more regular product for export. This is the story I was told. And so they coordinated a bunch of different lots of tea to be like processed like Liu Bao all together. But this kind of homogenized the flavors somewhat, creating a very reliable regular product. And relatively good quality shopuer is pretty cheap if you like the taste of it. And you better like the taste of it because, as a result, the taste has been well normalized. A lot of it tastes like very similar. It reminds me of dark roast coffee. When you roast coffee enough, it just tastes like the roast for the most part. And so coffee will taste more similar to each other. This is why, specialty coffee often considers it a little bit of a waste to roast too much, though that's a topic for another time. They've gotten a bit out of hand with that. The point is, you could do a lot of things that would create financial value in a way they wouldn't unless a government managed them, in a kind of different way than current societies in our world have done it, by using this productivity audit process. So I would imagine it would look basically like this. I know there was a lot of preamble. It feels like we haven't talked about it at all, but we set it all up. You basically got three categories: people who are earning now, people who are on strategy B and are currently trying to get that to pay off, and then people who are in between. And so you'll evaluate them as something like, well, if you are making your money now, we'll basically just do the normal thing. You have these societal expenses. And as I said, I think you can imagine this society probably taxes kind of highly, but provides a lot of basic services, or takes the universal basic income approach, one or the other. And therefore, you need to earn more on average than you need to in our current societies in the real world. But it's almost certainly significantly easier to do that than you would otherwise. It's especially easier to pursue a more high-paying job, because a lot of those basic expenses being covered, or your universal basic income, is going to make it a lot easier to get whatever startup you need. If you do a job where there is some startup cost, or you don't make a lot of money for a little while, well, you have some money or basic resources to begin with, and so that's not as bad. If you take a job where you need a lot of years of education, that's not as bad, or might even be paid for, but you just need to make sure you do make good money once you're in that job, etc. Then there's category 2, where things get a bit complicated. You are investing time now to make money later. Some of the time, you're investing time to make money now to make money later, where it's pretty clear what you will do later, and therefore how much money you will make. If you go to medical school, they can look up, you're planning to be a surgeon or whatever, and you would, they would on average make this amount of money. You're costing this societal resource to be in this profession. Therefore, this is what we can expect you will make, and that is okay or it isn't. So a lot of the time, that evaluation will be kind of simple still. Just evaluate what they're going to make later and then weigh that against the cost of doing it now. And literally, you could kind of do this before you even start, right? This society presumably will make education for those jobs cheap enough that they are valid. Otherwise, you literally just can't be a doctor. You could just conclude ahead of time that nobody will be able to be a doctor, let alone a surgeon, because the cost or societal punishment for getting education to do that job is too high for you to actually get to it. So we're going to assume you don't do that. And that therefore those jobs should be pretty stable. Getting what is in our society considered a more ambitious career is probably one of the safest options in this society, actually. Something like being a highly in-demand job, like a surgeon, maybe. It gets more complicated, and we can have some fun when we get into okay, you're making art. So you're making a movie or something, right? We understand that there could be a year or two in there where you need to do something that makes literally no money at all and costs significant money to be inspired for a movie, or find people to make the movie with, or switch things up, or what have you. And I think that even a person genuinely attempting to min-max their ability to be creatively productive and entertaining, or to inspire people with their art, or whatever they want to do, would still need some of that time. I don't think you can optimize that out. You need some air to make the art out of. Exactly how that process works, would be profitable for this government to figure out, but I don't know. I only vaguely, I don't know. I mean, I think you do need some time. And basically, the more your life can be about other things while you're still engaged in your art, the better your art will be. And that's hard. You kind of have to do two things at once. Be very like primary focused on the art you're going to make, but also be as unconcerned as possible with that specifically and live the rest of your life as well. Like touch some grass would be the short version, you know? And those things are at odds. So it is hard to do that. You could evaluate how well the person is balancing those two things. That could be an approach. Are they work-life balancing? If they're spinning their wheels with their career, I mean, are they getting consistent sleep, hydration, exercise, nutrition? They're still keeping up with that stuff. They have every intention of doing a good job, but they're currently in a place where they're either struggling, or we'll get to that in a minute, or they need to like recoup their mental energy somehow. We don't know exactly what the practical version of that looks like, but we all might think of like Brandon Sanderson needs to slow the hell down with writing books, and George R.R. Martin, it's not for me to say, but he is taking an awful long time with that one. You know, like you could do an average, but I think that's tricky. Like, who's to say? I mean, the ending of Game of Thrones was really bad, so I kind of want George R.R. Martin to take a long time with the ending. There's been, my friend has this theory that the ending of the Game of Thrones TV series like actually was just George R.R. Martin's intended ending. Like we pretty much know it isn't, but basically that he was thinking of something like that. And so now it's like, uh-oh, I gotta come up with something else. And like that might happen. You see what I mean? Hopefully this process includes, for the creatives, there's going to be an interview in here. And we have to decide on the workflow. Obviously, this is important to me because it would affect my work, where like if you're a famous creative making a work people want the ending to, and there's a reason you can explain easily why you haven't gotten to it yet, like, okay, you know what I mean? If George R.R. Martin were to say to everybody, hey, my ending is screwed, I want to do a good job, it's just really overwhelming and I don't know what to do, I've been doing some other projects. I know that's kind of frustrating, but the reason I'm doing that is actually to recoup my mental energy and figure out how to finish this in a satisfying way for everybody. And also that would make way more money if it isn't just the gigantic bomb that the international community laughs at. Maybe that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, okay. But obviously then it's not likely to be very practical if you interview like everybody doing an art. And I've been trying to avoid this, but this is also a pretty obvious abuse case, right? And so that's a part where this is going to be the hardest part for the society. Those jobs are often pretty efficient if they make money, but it's very difficult, like nearly impossible, to actually police them in a reliable way. You need to have a rather personal relationship with the person to see and pair apart to what extent they're really delayed and to what extent they have a hang up that's okay, but they do need to be doing some practical steps to work through. Ask me how I know. And so I do think that is hard. Like that's going to be difficult. I'm working on it myself and it's been difficult. It would be ridiculously hard, almost impossible for somebody else to make a meaningfully accurate evaluation of that. Ask me how I know in my personal life. So I do think that's a big bugbear for this. Again, I feel like some amount of you're doing your due diligence is something that, at least speaking personally, I feel like a lot of artists in my life, like, just clearly aren't doing or clearly are doing, and therefore, like, yeah, whatever, it's fine, you know? I have a friend who recently had a kid and moved into a new house after their house had a massive flood. And, you know, their life has been extremely busy, like lifelong high of busyness. But having known them for 5 or 7 years, or thereabouts, I don't count. We've known each other for a moderate amount of time. He is more on top of his interests than he's ever been. So I look on that pretty favorably. Like he's made more time for me actually than he did in the past. And I'm not complaining either way. He makes a very nice amount of he's a great friend. But I'm just saying, like, I've been very impressed to see he really is making time for that stuff. I feel like that one is kind of obvious. Some of the time it's not that obvious. My point is just that abuse case, and also like a lot of people are in the middle, it's not always that obvious, I don't think. That is tricky. And for many people, again, like looking to myself, I would almost like someone to evaluate this about me as long as they were fair about it. I would like to hear what other people think. Yeah, that thing is outside of your control. There's nothing you can do about that. But this is a thing where you seem to be acting like you can sit on your laurels with it and it'll work itself out. But I feel like you need to actually chew on this thing a little bit more. Okay, that would be useful. I don't know. That's what I try to do with myself. That would be useful to hear. I'm imagining that this part of the productivity audit would be like a genuine audit. Like they would actually try to help and say, like, this is what you need to improve on. And they're working with you on this thing to create societal value. That would create more societal value at the very least. That's why I'm assuming you do it in a good way. But the key point is that for most other jobs in this society, you would not, that wouldn't be relevant, really. You don't like as much need to check on how somebody who's working their job at this company is doing with that job. I'm sure it would be nice to include that. I mean, I think for some people it would be nice for that to be heard, but it's not required for the work to get done in the way that it arguably is for some creative works. And I think that creatives of all strokes could benefit from being a little managed, a very little amount managed. I've always said that my job, if I've chosen my job correctly, is like pretty much like I like doing this. It's a challenge, but I like the challenge. I want this challenge. This was a fun parlay. This was kind of an even more fun parlay than it's a very chaotic parlay to ask, right? Like, let's just kill everybody once they're not productive. Your thoughts? And then I just tell you that for 50 minutes. Crazy. I love it. This is what I like to see people use parlay for. Where the hell else are you going to ask people about this? Great. That's good. But I guess my point is just like, it's not entirely clear where this is creating value. I could explain it to you, but this is where your department's point, PistilWhip, I think is really good. Like the department for a certain type of creative is going to need to be staffed with almost unrecognizable people to like the rest of the surveying folks. And then finally, we have like the abuse cases or people that are between work. I just wanted to mention this. I think it's a thing where, like, again, you can say, well, helping them find the work is often more productive than like relegating them to permanent retirement. The interesting thing that I don't see a way that we could have had time for in this parlay, but to open up future discussion, I would love to talk more about this if you're interested. But even just as something to sit on at the end, is that when you say those who fail to meet the productivity quota are relegated to permanent retirement, wouldn't it very quickly become obvious that if somebody is unemployed for a year, but you can get them employed, it's better to like get them employed rather than permanently retire them? It seems to me like you probably only want to criticize people's output when they are making money. You see what I mean? And in a way, being unemployed might be a time where somewhat counterintuitively you want to lay off people. That was a mistake. Sorry. What I mean is leave them alone, not fire them. When people are unemployed, you should fire them. Again, just to make them feel worse. Damn it. But you get what I'm saying. It's entirely possible that when people are not employed, it's so likely to be more valuable to just get them employed that it is better to leave them alone. And then it's only when they are employed that you want to look at, like, is this beneficial enough? But as I was saying throughout this parlay, if you extract this concept enough and kind of propagate out all the things that it would mean, you could even take a step further and say, well, why would the society even allow jobs that can make little enough money that they aren't worth the society doing? You see what I mean? And if they don't allow those jobs, then that means that if you're unemployed and you will be employed doing anything, the society may have already guaranteed that that job makes you enough money that it will be okay. And therefore, like, unless the society purposefully allows you to do something, scripted, like you're employed to someone else, again, the creative work, you could fail that way. But if you get employed, I think the end state of a society like this, the meta, if you will, would be that there wouldn't be jobs offered that don't make enough money that it would be okay to do them. And then the remaining question is, if you're out of a job often enough, you're then lowering the average earning of that job. So a job is available, and in this society, that means it makes enough money that you're not going to be permanently retired if you work that job. But you work that job not for 10 years, but for 8 years, and you're unemployed for 2 of those years. you switch places, you're doing that job, or for some reason you're unproductive for some of that time, right? Then maybe that brings the average down enough that it's now not worth it. And so you have something like a maximum amount of unemployed time is the result. But if you haven't gone over that amount of time, the society acknowledges that it is clearly more money to just let you go do some of that work. And it's just that maybe later in your life, darkly, probably being unemployed is no big deal at all now, and you will probably even be significantly supported by the country. The problem is that later in your life, you're going to get excommunicated from existence because you having had some unemployed time means your average earning over time drops. And so what you do about that part is, again, maybe the specific criteria for that are outside the scope of this parlay. Like, what is the amount of money that means you're not earning enough? But this is what I meant when I said the specific criteria in that sense are absolutely the topic of this parlay, in my opinion. And it has some weird implications. I hope this is what you wanted the parlay to be about, because it's a complicated and kind of fascinating question, as long as we can reassure everybody that we're not like trying to do this, which I hope we did. If you're upset with us for bringing this up, please don't be. And that's all I have to say. I'm not trying to be hateful toward anyone that exists. I was asked to speculate on this subject. I think it's an interesting subject to speculate on. As you can see, there are some significant problems to implementing this in the real world. Like, no shit, but there are. And so we talked about those for a little bit in this parlay. And that's just my opinion. Okay, if you want your own parlay like this, you could do that using a link in the description. And again, thank you to some of you folks for supporting the show. We don't live in a society like this, and we have a vaguely coherent way for people to become, I'm trying my best to be a successful entertainer because of you. So thank you for your support. Looking forward to the next one.